Middle East.
Middle East, yeah. Just on your, well, first of all, on the broader situation, I'd like to get what the administration thinks about what's going on right now. But before that, I want to get into your statement from yesterday on the UNRWA school. It was a pretty tough statement. I don't think anyone can deny that or would argue with that. I mean, you certainly wouldn't, would you? I mean, I can't recall there being this kind of, harsh criticism of Israel coming from certainly this administration, but I can't remember going back many years. So you clearly felt very strongly about what happened here. And what I'm wondering is whether or not, in light of this statement and in light of the disgraceful shelling, as you called it, of this, if the administration is prepared to do anything to back up these strong words with some kind of a demonstrable action against or towards Israel. In other words, you supply Israel with weapons and ammunition all the time. Is there any discussion about limiting that?
No. I think I would just reiterate that the statement was specifically about our concerns about the shelling in the neighborhood of the school. As you know, it was the 7th such attack. As we know, we've seen hundreds of individuals displaced in Gaza. We've seen more than that, I should say, but related to the schools. Dozens have died in these incidents. And this was a reflection of our view that there's more that Israel can do to prevent civilian casualties. That was what it was speaking to. It does not change the fact that Israel remains an important security and strategic partner of the United States. We believe they have the right to defend themselves. While they have the right to defend themselves, there's more they can do in that regard to prevent events like those that happened just yesterday.
Right, but people have criticized this statement or criticized the administration for being hypocritical and putting out a statement this strongly, yet at the same time supplying Israel with weapons and armaments, weapons and ammunition that it uses in these attacks that you're condemning. You don't see a problem? You don't see you don't see an issue there?
Well, I think not just because of these events, but we still believe that our primary goal and objective here is to prevent the indiscriminate rocket attacks and terrorists coming up through tunnels into Israel. Our concerns about that haven't changed. It doesn't mean that we can't also call for a different type of approach or actions as Israel is defending itself.
The Israeli people on the pro-Israel in Israel and on the pro-Israel side have also accused you all of hypocrisy, particularly for this line that says the suspicion that militants are operating nearby does not justify strikes that put at risk the lives of so many innocent civilians. Is that the United States has been conducting drone strikes and other strikes in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen for years, in which innocent civilians have been killed and collateral damage. Does this kind of a statement from the State Department apply to? Would you say the same thing to the Pentagon across the river?
Well, certainly we have, and Afghanistan is a good example, and we have used that example of a place where the United States has had to take steps over time, of course, to prevent civilian casualties, and we have done exactly that.
Okay, so you don't see any difference, any dissonance between telling Israel that just the suspicion of militants being nearby isn't enough to put at risk the lives of innocent civilians, and what this government does itself.
In fact, we're saying we hold ourselves to a high standard, and we've had to keep ourselves to a high standard over time, and Israel should do the same.
Especially on the statement themselves. You said you were appalled, then Samantha Power, the ambassador at the UN, called it horrifying. You both called for Israel to do more. To stop. In the interim, in the past 24 hours since this thing happened, have you seen that Israel has really scaled back these attacks and have become more careful as a result of your statement?
Well, Said, I just don't have an analysis of that. I think we're talking about how to approach things moving forward, not just in a couple of hours.
Okay, well, let me ask you, why don't you have analysis? I mean, when you say we want you to do this, how do you measure it? Do you have a gauge that you go by so you can look to see whether your statement...
I think we can all measure it publicly, and obviously we have our own means of gathering information. I just don't have any more to share with you from here.
Okay, now you keep repeating that Israel has the right to defend itself. do you believe that doing such a strike, conducting such a strike, is part of Israel's self-defense?
I think our statement spoke to it yesterday, Saeed. That doesn't change the fact that Hamas is a terrorist organization that has been attacking, launching rocket attacks, coming through tunnels. That is still our primary concern here.
Okay. Now, on the issue, on the efforts to conduct or to do a ceasefire, there's a lot of talk now that maybe they are on the verge of doing a ceasefire. Are you involved in this process at all, or is the Secretary of State completely now disengaged after being so frustrated?
No, quite
with his efforts?
quite the contrary, Saeed. I think the Secretary has been engaged through the course of the weekend with the same counterparts and interlocutors he was prior to the weekend, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, including the Qataris, the Turks, the Egyptians, others who have been engaged in this effort. Our objective here hasn't changed. There needs to be a prolonged ceasefire in order to have a negotiation about these key issues. Otherwise, it's difficult to see how there can be stability and peace in the region.
Will the Secretary forego his ideas that he introduced to add to the Egyptian proposal and go back to the Egyptian proposal, since both Qatar and Turkey have been completely nixed out of the process?
Well, first, I'd refute a couple of things you said. One is what we're talking about here is a prolonged ceasefire where the difficult key issues could be discussed. Obviously, there's fighting that's ongoing. There was a short ceasefire that happened today. The Egyptians have indicated an openness to hosting. Frank Lowenstein returned overnight. He'll be back later this evening, but he's prepared to return. But that doesn't change the fact that we feel is an important part of how to resolve the situation here. The Secretary will continue to be involved and engaged because he wants to see an end to the violence on the ground.
And my last question, early on in this conflict, I asked you at what point it becomes, Israel's actions be termed as a genocide or a collective punishment and so on. Do you feel that by now, that after maybe 10,000 injured and maybe 2,000 killed and so on, that it has gotten to that point?
I think Is
there a figure that at which point will you say enough is enough?
I think, Saeed, even one civilian casualty is horrific. Obviously, there have been many more than that. I think the strength of our statement yesterday speaks to our concern and the need to do more in this regard. Nicole?
Is there any plan to replace Ambassador Indyk and have another senior negotiator?
Frank Lowenstein
has taken.
Frank Lowenstein has taken his place.
Then
we won't show him that part of it.
About this. Netanyahu has said during the last hours that there is a country that is helping all this situation, and he mentioned Qatar. He said there are some countries that are helping Hamas in taking all these weapons. Also, he mentioned Iran. Is the U.S. talking with some of these countries to see what's going on in their relation with Hamas?
Well, we have certainly been talking to the Qataris. We have not been talking to the Iranians about this, no. The Qataris have been an important interlocutor, and they were through the course of last week, not because they need to be in the middle of it, but because they have a relationship, an influential relationship with Hamas. And certainly we can sit there and talk with the countries that we all agree with, but that hardly creates a successful negotiation. So that's why we've been engaged. The Secretary remains engaged with the Qataris and the Turks, and I expect that will continue.
But the U.S. agrees with the Israelis that Qatar is helping Hamas in getting all these weapons that they are using to throw to Israel?
I think that our view is that the Qataris can play a role here and that they have a relationship with Hamas in working towards a resolution.
Do you believe that Qatar is providing Hamas with weapons?
I did not state that. Ali?
You've been pretty explicit in ascribing responsibility of this latest UN attack, school attack on the Israelis. Not to split hairs here, but the statement released over the weekend was a little less explicit, saying that the shelling was disgraceful, but it doesn't actually directly ascribe responsibility to the Israelis. So from what you're saying, can we understand that the State Department does ascribe blame or responsibility for this latest shelling to the Israelis?
No, I was saying, look, we don't have all the independently verifiable information here. We do know that there were coordinates that were provided. We have seen the context of the history here. And we've seen, of course, the shellings of 6 other UNRWA schools. We want to see a thorough investigation of this incident as well as the other 6 that have happened.
But it seems that this was the most vocal and tough, as other people have pointed out, statement condemning, not ascribing causality to what happened to the UN school, but condemning the Israelis for what they have done. So
well, there's a range of information that's out there that you're familiar with, including that we've talked about, which is the fact that they had the coordinates. But again, that's why there are investigations about these incidents, and we certainly support that.
And one final on this, has Secretary Kerry communicated these concerns to Prime Minister Netanyahu since this latest attack?
Well, he spoke with him briefly yesterday morning, and their phone call was cut off. I think there was some communications issue, but he has raised our concern about civilian casualties in the past, and certainly that's consistent, but not this specific.
Questions about Israeli spying, for lack of a better word, on his telephone calls?
There's just nothing more I have to read out from the call.
What kind of communication error? Did Netanyahu hang up on him?
Sometimes calls get cut off. There was a brief call, is what I'm trying to convey. I expect they'll.
Well, was it? Yeah, but
There
your
was-
communication
there
error
was
wasn't
nothing-
one side slamming the phone down.
There
on the
was
other,
nothing
it?
that interesting about it. No, that was not the case.
Okay.
That was not the case.
Did in that brief phone call or in any conversations that other people in this building, Frank, I don't know, or in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, since your statement, I mean, presumably this conversation that you talked about that was interrupted was before the statement came out, yes?
I believe yes.
Since the statement has come out, and since Israelis and their supporters have reacted quite angrily to your rather harsh words, has there been any contact, conversations that you're aware of between people in this building, including the Secretary and the Israeli government?
Not the Secretary, and Frank's been on a plane. I'm certain we've probably been in touch on the ground, but I just don't have any other readouts.
So, in other words, you don't know, or there haven't?
Honestly, we're, as you know, Ambassador Shapiro and others are in very close contact. I haven't heard any readouts. We don't typically get those.
Right, okay.
The Secretary has not been.
Are you aware of the criticism of your statement that is coming from Israel and the pro-Israel community?
Of course, I've seen information out there
You
in
are?
news reports, Matt. But
Okay, so the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Mr. Oren, was on one of the shows earlier today and said, this is not the way that friends and allies, treat each other. They don't say things. What do you say to criticism like that?
well, I think our concern here is not a reflection of our strong relationship with Israel. It's about these specific incidents and the fact that they can do more to hold themselves to a high standard.
One of the
One that they've put out there.
You also said that you would expect, and that Israel should be able to expect more from its main ally. You don't share that sentiment?
Well, I think there's no country in the world, I think, that supports Israel's security more than the United States. And that is evidenced by the amount of funding we give to the Iron Dome, by a range of steps we take. That hasn't changed. I think we still, the strength of a relationship is often shown by the ability to express concerns when you have them. And this is a case.
All right. And then just getting back to the provision of U.S. military equipment to Israel. Because given the statement that you made yesterday, with that as backdrop, does the administration have any concern that weapons that it has either sold or given or transferred some other how to Israel is being used in what you call a disgraceful shelling of a UN school or similar incidents?
Well, Matt, I just don't have that level of information. I mean, certainly we expressed concern about the incidents here because we think there's more that can be done. But, as you know, these requests are reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
I don't expect that will change.
But there are those who would say that the U.S. that you have condemned something here that the U.S. is actually complicit in, because it is providing so much the support that you just talked about in answer to my previous question. Providing that to Israel. The administration is not concerned that the stuff that it's sending to the Israelis is being used in military operations that you condemn as appalling and disgraceful?
Well, I think we made clear that having military targets in an area doesn't justify it. So I think the statement speaks to some of the concerns we had about materials that were used wherever they came from.
On this issue, Jen, your ally, Great Britain is Mr. Cameron is doing a review of the arms that they are supplying to Israel to make, just for that very purpose, to see whether the ammunition or the arms were actually used in these school attacks. Will you be doing the same?
Well,
Is
we
that something
already
that you are
review all
considering?
requests for military
No,
assistance on
I'm
a
not talking about the
case-by-case
request.
basis.
He's reviewing the whole package to see whether these arms have been actually used in these particular incidents, as they were
There's
called
no
by-
other review I have to read out.